So pleased to be here with all of you tonight. My name is Olga Liapi-Slezzi. I'm the Associate Organizing Director of Training here at Indivisible, one of your co-facilitators for the evening, and I'm joined by Scott. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, hey, hi everybody. Well, welcome back and welcome to the new folks. This is really great. We're in part 2, right, of our training session, and I guess I just want to say to re-up that, yeah, we put this together specifically for the rural caucus because we heard that there was lots of rural groups that wanted to do deep values canvassing, and we also have a deep values canvassing pilot program going on right now with a number of rural groups, and that's super exciting. So they're here as kind of the kernel of this, but we opened it out to everybody, and there's been a fantastic take up. There's practically 100 people on it again tonight. So you don't have to be part of a deep values canvas ongoing right now to take advantage of these skills. You're super welcome to be here. We love this. But if you want to start nudging your group, particularly your rural group, to be thinking about doing community to community deep values canvassing, by all means, I will put our emails in the, you could talk to your organizer, or you could send an email to me at rural@indivisible.org, and I'll put that in the chat. rural@indivisible.org. Hey, we'd like to do a deep values canvas through our local group. Who can help? And I'll get right back to you. All right, thank you, Olga. Welcome everyone.
Thanks, Scott. And let's get a quick show of hands. If folks could use the reaction button inside of Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand if this is the first session that you've participated, that you weren't here last week, and this is the first session. I just kind of want to get an idea. Okay, we got a couple hands. Okay, great. Yes, just like Scott said, you don't have to have been here last week. You don't have to be part of the Rural Caucus. This is really a session that's open to everybody, but we are catering the content this week, all 4 of these weeks, specifically to rural deep canvassing, and we will be building a little bit off of the content that we worked on last week. So if you weren't here last week and you have any questions, please just jump into the chat box, and you'll also have a chance to work with somebody during the breakouts to get any of your questions answered. So with that, let's get started. So our agenda for today is a 4-part agenda. So we're going to start off, for those of you who were here last week, you'll remember that all of our sessions, all 4 of our sessions here for the month of June will have 2 portions to them. There'll be a foundations portion that will kind of start off the evening, and then a skill building portion that will really connect into whatever set of skills we're focusing on for today. For that evening, for that training, I should say. And today our foundation piece is going to be a little bit of a review on empathy, which was a big focus last week. But pretty quickly, we're going to dive into new content. And our skill building content for tonight is taking a look at deep canvassing scripts and specifically focusing on steps 1, 2, and eventually even step 3 of our deep canvassing conversation. But in between there, we'll have a bunch of opportunities to practice, and we'll even get to see a couple videos, or excuse me, 1 video of a live deep canvassing conversation. And with that, I do want to go through a couple space norms. We are recording, and all materials will be sent out after. A quick note on this, we are legally obligated to only send emails to those who consent to them. So you may have noticed in the registration process, you were asked whether you are okay with receiving follow-up emails. We're only allowed to send the recording to people who said yes. If you ever have a moment that you didn't receive the recording and you want it, please just reach out to us and we're happy to share it with you. You can reach out to training@indivisible.org. And captions are available for anybody who wants to use them tonight. You can control them. You can turn them on through your control bar, I should say. And you've already noticed that we're in meeting form, so we welcome you to turn on your video. We love to get facial interactions, even though we're through Zoom. It makes it feel a little bit more like we're in the same room together, but please stay on mute while you're not speaking. But we will have some participation moments. So if you do have a desire to speak during that moment, just go ahead and jump into the chat box and say I can share, and we'll go ahead and choose a few folks. And we're also going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's training. So if you have questions, please jump into the chat box and type the word question in front of your question so it's easy for our chat moderators to pull those. And thank you, Trisha, and thank you, Rachel, for being our chat moderators tonight. And then we ask that you use the chat box with balance. You know, sometimes we know that the chat box can get really animated, and we simply ask that you use it with balance. And then our last space norm for today is that everything that we've crafted today is an offering for all of you. It's a set of best practices that has been created in partnership with other organizations and from our own experiences with deep canvassing. But none of these are prescriptions. You know your community best. We definitely suggest looking at this more as a buffet that you can take the pieces that make the most sense for you. Okay. Enough space norms. Let's talk about what happened last week. So I know some of you weren't there, but the overwhelming majority were. I'd love to know, how did it go last week with the homework? We asked you all to listen for needs in your conversations. I'm actually going to stop sharing for a moment just so it's a little bit easier to see you all. And I'm curious to know, how did it go? Is anybody interested in sharing?
This is Val.
Yeah, go for it, Val.
So I realized what I didn't do. Like in hindsight, I realized where I screwed up. My sister and her family are unvaccinated, and I've had some conversations with her where that was, I mean, I didn't really want that conversation with her, but it kind of came up. And I realized that, like in hindsight, you know, to kind of better understand, oh, you know, the need, to name the need, or to, you know, kind of suggest what I'm hearing is her need. Oh, you're thinking it's unsafe actually for your family to be vaccinated. You know, is that right? You know, and like, I did not do that. I kind of just froze in this place of not being judgmental, you know, not trying to jump down her throat, just, you know, oh, you know, and I didn't learn anything. I didn't take the conversation any further. I just kind of got stuck in, you know, being a good listener rather than moving things. And I didn't figure that out till later.
Oh, Valerie, thank you for sharing. My first reaction is to say that even though it may not have felt like the fullest use of kind of identifying needs, it sounds to me like you were really successful in some ways nonetheless. Because one of the big parts of empathetic listening is not judging the person that we're talking to. So even being able to catch yourself and say, okay, I am not going to respond in that way, I think is a step in the right direction. And it sounds like you're kind of ready and primed for the next conversation to be even sharper and even stronger, because now you've been thinking about, okay, here's something that I could have said. Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else have successes? Maybe not so many successes. Y'all, I have to say that could people put down their hand if the reason you put up your hand was for my original question of whether you were here last week, and that'll make it easier for me to know whether people want to share or not. Thank you so much. Okay, so none of those hands were for that. That's all right. Great, Janet.
I had, can you hear me?
Sure can.
I had a conversation with a young man, a 14-year-old boy who I know in my rural community. And I was telling him, I'm so excited that I can get out and be with you now because I'm vaccinated. And he said, oh, I am not getting vaccinated. My mom or my grandma, who he lives with, is scared about the vaccination. And he said, I'd kind of like to get it, but she's really scared. And I just said, she's scared. And I just tried to keep repeating what he told me. And he told me something outrageous. He said that his grandma and aunt watched this zombie apocalypse movie that takes place in 2021, and that the COVID vaccine, if you took it, you would turn into a zombie. And he was scared about, he said, this is bad that you could turn into a zombie. And it took everything I had not to react judgmentally. And I just asked him, well, do you believe that? And he made me feel so good, because he said, heck no, I don't believe it. And I was just so glad that I didn't respond negatively when he said zombie apocalypse if I take the vaccine. And so I had such a great bonding with this boy, because he told me, I want to get the vaccine, but I can't, I'm not 16. And I was able to share with him that he could now get it. So that's my story.
Oh, that's great, Janet. Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like you were encountering real disinformation. That's a new one for me. I had not heard that we might turn into zombies. But it sounds like you handled that with curiosity. You honed in on curiosity instead of judgment, and really were able to differentiate between his opinions versus his grandmother's, which are also really important in conversations, because sometimes we parrot ideas that are somebody else's, but if as a listener, we're not paying sharp attention to whether this is that person's opinion or not, we can kind of take the conversation in a direction that's less helpful. So really, really well done. Scott, is there anything you want to add to this? Or we can move on.
Nope, just thank you for coming off mute, Val and Janet.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's keep going a little bit then, y'all. So one of the things that Scott and I were really reflecting on as a follow-up to last week were some of the questions that came up in our Q&A. So for those of you who were here last week, you might remember them. Two of the questions in particular that sat with us were, are we therapists? Which I think is a really fair one. And then the second one is, can you kind of get stuck at empathy? And then furthermore, as Scott and I were talking about this and really editing the content for this week, we were further taking the question and kind of asking it in a new way and saying, is empathy actually that important in a deep canvassing conversation, especially if you have a script that you're getting through? And so for those of you who have been part of deep canvassing efforts that are like related to campaigns or issue, you'll know that you have a script that you're working off of. So how does empathy even work into this? And to answer that question, we'd like to go to our first breakout. So our first breakout for today will be something called Empathy Buddies. Again, if you can't participate in this breakout, that's absolutely okay. Just please put a star in front of your name and we'll go ahead and accommodate. But if you can participate, we definitely urge you to. And you'll be placed in pairs. Your job is to share for an equal amount of time. So, depending on exactly how much time you have in the breakout, try to split it between the two of you. And you'll have two roles. You'll either be listening as an empathizer or you'll be sharing. When you're listening and you're empathizing, turn your full attention to the other person. This is a review for those of you who were here last week, but for anyone who's new, what we mean by empathize in this case is to turn your full attention towards the other person. Try just to listen and avoid giving advice. And then when you're speaking, practice vulnerability and talk about something that you care about. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of Indivisible or your Indivisible work, although it certainly can be. And then we ask that you agree to maintain confidentiality. And we're just going to see what this feels like and draw some lessons from it. Any questions about the activity before we jump in? Okay, so since it's 8:20, we're going to bring you all back. Yes, Patricia, thank you for that question. We're going to bring you all back at 8:30. So you'll be in your breakout room for 10 minutes, or at least we'll bring everybody back at 8:30. And Rachel, let's give it a try. Are we ready to go into breakouts?
We are very close. Give me just a moment. I'm trying to finish matching up anyone that has changed their status. And might have an odd number, so we're gonna do our best. Here we go.
Okay, so anyone who's left in the main room, if you want to be in a breakout, please just let us know right now and we'll see about switching things up. Okay, Sandra, you would like to be in a breakout? Great. Rachel, was there an odd number? Is there someone we can connect Sandra with?
Do it to room 23.
Great.
Hi, I was just reporting that I seem to be alone in my breakout room.
Okay, which room was that?
Oh, crap.
And we can do a similar thing that if you want to jump into the chat box, you're welcome to jump into the chat box, or we can probably hear from one person. Cheryl, go ahead.
Well, you know, I don't talk a lot really. And, you know, just her kind of, you know, mirroring back or just being willing to listen made me talk more, you know, like just her being willing to hear what I had to say made me want to elaborate more. And that was kind of nice.
It's an invitation to keep going, right? Because we're getting all this validation, we're being truly heard. Absolutely. I see Linda in the chat box. It's empowering to connect with someone, share stories, and draw people out. Yeah, how I really see it, y'all, is that being empathized with makes us feel open to new ideas. So I'd be curious to know if you feel kind of energetically in your body, do you feel a little bit more open to new ideas potentially? And overall, what empathizing with others allows us to do is it allows us to have a genuine connection, and genuine connections lower human defenses. And so that's really what makes empathizing so powerful on the doors. But what I don't want to do is pretend that the empathy buddies, and I want to make sure, can everybody see my screen? Because I am switching through the PowerPoint. Okay. What we don't want to pretend is that the conversations on the doors or on the phone and a deep canvassing conversation will feel exactly the same as your empathy buddies. Some things will change. For one thing, we are not therapists. Unless some of you are licensed therapists, in which case you are, but as a deep canvasser, we are not therapists, but we are listening. And although there's no guarantee that the other person is being vulnerable or that the connection is genuine, we can at least show up in that manner and invite the other person to meet us there. And the last thing that really does change between the conversation you just had in the breakout rooms versus for a deep canvassing conversation is that it's not about just anything. We don't want to necessarily know this person's life story. We are having a very focused, specific conversation on the issue at hand. And so therefore the questions that we're asking are also really specific. And Scott, do you want to speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, that totally works. It was, and we had part of this discussion in the breakout group I was with as well. You I wanted to have this slide on here because I've been thinking a lot about, why we focus on the needs, right? And I just want to kind of re-up a couple things that, really feel important to me. Number one is, even if we get it wrong, it's still a great mental exercise to increase the empathy. And so the way I've been thinking about it is, listening attentively and really getting to what they're trying to tell you and what the need is behind it. It's going to actually show up on your face. And, we're going to be giving body language that we really are sort of caring. And that, number two, allows us to get, on an emotional level of the conversation and a human sort of connection with the person on the phone or on the doors. When we're focusing on the needs and we're empathizing. And that's vital, as we learned last week, so that we stay off the facts, right? So we stay away from, how am I going to argue with this? How am I going to talk? How am I going to explain that, no, there's not going to be a zombie virus? That's not really a thing, right? As Janet kind of laid out for us. Number three, it's really great to focus on needs because those are the kinds of questions, those are the kind of thoughts that can allow us to articulate a question that's going to draw them out into this kind of emotional sort of human level of things, allow them to elaborate as well, and maybe even encourage them some introspection, which gets them into another part of their brain where they're not thinking about the facts. They're thinking, and we're anchoring our experience, our conversation, and the issue into their inner world. And that's going to turn out to be really vital to have something stay with them by the time they get to the ballot box. And the fourth thing I really wanted to emphasize was, we don't need to nail their needs. If we get it wrong, if we guess wrong, that's okay. Because at least we're showing the person on the doors that we're hearing them, as a full human being. And again, encouraging them to dig in, because if they need to correct us, that's perfect. And even if we nail it, they might be like, I don't want to be identified as that kind of person, so I'm going to say something else. But they're exploring who they are, and they're exploring why these things matter. So I really wanted to just emphasize some of those things on this slide.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And for anybody who wasn't here last week, we're going to define needs once again a little bit later on. So please stick with us. I know this might feel a little bit confusing because you weren't here last week, but we just wanted, we are giving homework, optional homework for everybody, but strongly encouraged. And we just wanted to acknowledge it and spend a little bit of time with it, which really brings us to the first new kind of portion of our training tonight, skill building. Deep canvassing scripts and steps 1 and 2. So let's dig in. So what you'll remember from last week, or might be new to you today, is that the definition of deep canvassing is that it's a voter outreach method that centers two-way candid conversations where the canvasser asks voters to share their relevant, emotionally significant experiences and reflect on them out loud. And on your screen here, you'll see these are the 5 steps to how we accomplish this. You got to begin the conversation. You spend the majority, I would argue, or a lot of time, empathetically listening. We share our story and vision. Almost always, some type of conflicting view is unearthed, and we spend some time reconciling those conflicting views before we end with a call to action. Not every deep canvassing conversation looks exactly like this, but a lot of them do. And 2 things to note about these. We're going to go into steps 1, 2, and 3 now, and then we'll go into steps 4 and 5 next week. But 2 things to keep in mind is that this conversation guide is not always linear. It's not, there are many times where you're in the beginning of the conversation, all of a sudden the voter will say something that pivots you to reconciling conflicting views. It's not this perfect linear path. It can go in a couple different directions. And sometimes you kind of have to repeat steps in order to have a good and full conversation. And then the second thing to keep in mind is this rule of thumb, which is the 70-30 rule. So we want to be listening 70% of the time and speaking for 30% of the time. So for the full conversation, we really are listening more than we are speaking. So let's start at the beginning. When you're talking to a stranger, there are really 3 parts to an introduction to beginning the conversation. First, you want to introduce yourself. Second, you want to say why you're there. And then third, you want to ask a question to get them talking. If you are not speaking with a stranger, it's really step 3 that pivots you into a deep canvassing conversation by asking a specific question relevant to the issue that you want to discuss. But we want to share an example, a real life example. We'll be working deeply with scripts tonight, all based on a real campaign that's going on in Minneapolis. Scott, can you tell us about it?
Yep, perfect. Yep. So this is great. So it's right close to home because I live in St. Paul, and this real life deep values canvas is happening right now. It's being run through People's Action, who have teamed up with TakeAction Minnesota. So People's Action is a larger national organization. It's a partner with Indivisible quite a lot on particularly rural things. And TakeAction Minnesota is based in the Twin Cities, and they're really spearheading a lot of the work around a city charter amendment. The city charter amendment, it's going to be voted on in November, and it deals with community safety. And it has 2 parts. The first part is it's going to create a new Department of Public Safety, and that will sort of replace or at least oversee the Minneapolis Police Department. And it's going to introduce and amplify a public health approach to public safety, in addition to continuing with more traditional policing. And the second thing it's going to do, though, it's kind of already said this, it's going to remove the police only approach to public safety. And the way that the amendment is shaping up, there's a working group of Black-led organizations that are doing an awful lot of work around community policing and public safety, and they're working as well with the Minneapolis City Council, who have to amend the city charter of Minneapolis in order to transform policing in the city. So that to change the city charter, they've got to pass an amendment in November that residents in Minneapolis are going to get to vote on. So that's the background to this deep values canvas.
And here's our introduction. So Scott, do you want to walk us through that?
Okay, yeah, sure. So they're doing this every weekend, almost every weekend. And so I did it a couple weekends ago. So this looks really familiar to me. So I'll start. Hi, is this Philip? Philip, hey, it's Scott Ickes here. I'm a volunteer with Take Action Minnesota. Hey, I hope you're having a good day. So we're out talking to people across the city this week about a charter amendment, and we'll be voting on this in Minneapolis in November. And the charter amendment deals with our community safety. And Philip, I was wondering, have you been following what's been moving in regards to the Minneapolis Police Department and the Minneapolis City Charter?
Bam, beautiful. So what did Scott do? He introduced himself. He briefly but specifically talked about why he's on the doors or why he's having this phone conversation, and then immediately went to a question to elicit a response from the voter. So that's the introduction. At this point, we're pivoting from the introduction into empathetic listening. And there are 5 things that we want to draw out about empathetic listening. We spent a decent amount of time on this last week, but here are the 5 things to really kind of think about when you're applying these skills specifically to a deep canvassing conversation. You want to turn your compassionate attention to the other person. Attention is a tool that we can use. We can point it internally to ourselves. You can pay attention to different parts of your body, for example, but it's also a tool we can turn outwards to other people. And so this is really about turning our attention fully on the other person so that we can understand what they're saying and where they're coming from, but maintaining a level of compassion as we're doing it and moving away from judgment. We want to give physical cues of our listening. That might be mm-hms. I'm a big fan of that one. Whatever the right physical cue that feels natural to you. And then we want to ask open-ended and follow-up questions. Does anybody know can anyone define an open-ended question for me? Jump into the chat real quick. Go ahead and just go into the chat to answer it. Yeah, not a yes or no answer. Absolutely, that's absolutely it. And a follow-up question is a question that kind of follows the line of a conversation, that follows up specifically on something that the person just said. We want to draw out the needs behind what the person is saying, and we're about to go into that a little bit more, and then listen for their correction if we guess wrong. So if someone's saying something, let's say that someone's saying on the doors that they are really not sure about this charter amendment because they've heard a lot of different things about it, and they don't really know. They don't want to make a decision until they have all the information. And so I might say, oh, it sounds like, you need more, you have a need for information to make sure that you are making a great decision here. And if the person says, you know what, no, that's not what it's really about. It's that I don't trust the information that I'm getting. And all of a sudden, that's actually a whole other avenue that we're in. And to Scott's point earlier, it's not about guessing it correctly. It's about listening and understanding more deeply about what the person is saying, and so allowing ourselves to be corrected. But let's go into this interlude a little bit on needs. So into the chat right now, we're gonna add a handout. We're gonna post a handout, I should say, inside of the chat that's a list of universal needs. And so a definition of a need is the resources life requires to sustain itself. The concept of needs come from nonviolent communication. And I'll give you a couple other examples here. So let's say that the person says, I'm really concerned that this measure will make crime go up. Go ahead and take a moment, y'all. Jump into the link that was just shared in the chat. Thank you, Trisha. And what need do you kind of foresee here? What's a potential need behind this statement? I see Susan says safety. Love it. Anything else? Security.
Maybe a sense that the change might be threatening.
That the change might threaten kind of how they feel, or kind of their stability in a way. Fear of change, absolutely. I said safety here, but I think these other potential needs that all of you are identifying are also just as possible. Here's another example. I think they're pushing this through too quickly. What do you think a need behind that statement might be? And go ahead, like I said, jump into the list of needs to kind of get an idea. Time to consider control, stability, and order. Choice, fear of change, stability. Yes, I also said choice, but again, I think these other options that you all are identifying are also possibilities. Because again, it's not about finding the right answer, it's about trying to understand. And then let's just take one more. Will this make my taxes go up? I'm already paying too much. What do you think is the need behind that? Security, financial security and stability. Absolutely. Freedom, thriving. I said fairness, a feeling of paying too many taxes. But again, I think your guesses here are really great, y'all. And we don't have any way of knowing whether these are truly the potential needs behind a statement until we ask somebody. So because this is a pretend scenario, it's not like there's a right or wrong answer here. But the thing to really keep in mind is that we are looking to just go deeper with people, and we're using this identifying of needs as a way to go deeper. But let's go ahead and look at what this looks like in an actual canvassing conversation. So we're back to our Minneapolis example. This was our introduction. So, hi, is this Scott? Hey, this is Olga, a volunteer with TakeAction Minnesota. Happy to talk with you. We're all talking to people across the city today about a charter amendment we'll be voting out in November. It deals with community safety. We've asked this question. Have you been following what's been moving in regards to MPD and the Minneapolis City Charter? You'll remember what Scott said, which is that this is an info gathering deep canvas. And so there's information that we are giving at the same time that we are gathering, because not a lot of people, or not enough people in Minneapolis know the details of this charter. So this script has two follow-up questions that come right after the introduction. The first is, the charter amendment has two parts. The first part would create a new Department of Public Safety that oversees Minneapolis PD with a public health approach to public safety. How does that sound to you? Often, that pivots us into an entire conversation. But it is kind of the first part. We want to ensure that people understand both elements of the charter. And so then the second part of the charter amendment is about removing the police-only approach to public safety and would allow the city council to be flexible in how it funds safety alternatives to policing. How does that proposal sound to you? So you can see here that we immediately have two prompts to get us an idea about how much information the person already knows and what their overall feeling is. But then we have this series of questions that we can ask to get at the heart of what the person is feeling and sensing. Scott, do you want to walk us through those?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you ask one of those two questions, particularly, how does that sound to you? How does that feel to you? They are going to have a series of responses, and you can kind of imagine what they are. They're going to kind of run the gamut. This is where you want to sort of work out, and you want to engage them on that level of their needs, and you want to sort of tease them out on the level of how they feel about these things. And so we've got a series of questions here. We don't run through them all. You're just going to pick and choose. They're kind of examples that are in the script for you as you're on the doors or on the phones, to give you some ideas of how to continue deepening that conversation. Do you mind telling me more about X? Do you know people who have had bad experiences with police? Why do you feel the way you do? And some of these were your answers in the chat box to open it. What's an open-ended question? Why do you feel the way you do? Really nice. What would you need to see in this measure for you to support it, for example? And so these are ways to kind of keep the conversation focused on them, keep drawing them forward. And I'm going to stop there and ask you what you see in these potential responses. Could you pop in the chat box, like maybe what you see that is in common with these prompt questions? What's in each of them? But then also what's not in each of them. Asking for personal experiences, about feelings, experiences. Yep. And each is the word you. Fantastic. It's no judgment. Making it specific about the campaign. Yep. Interest in what the other person's feeling, thinking, not judging, not giving facts, turning attention back to the person. There's no advice in there, no correct answers, no leading questions. And they all get to how and why. Yep. They all focus on, okay, fantastic. Keep them coming. This is really great. Really great stuff. Okay. So, Olga, what's next? We're going to give it a try, right? Okay, we're gonna bump us back into the breakout rooms. Okay, so Rachel and Trisha, we've got another breakout room moment coming up. Make sure that your stars are in front of your names if you don't want to be a part of this, because again, we're gonna put you in pairs. And Olga, for how long this time? 15 minutes, right? So there's a little bit longer time. I'd like to say we heard you in the chat, but we actually had it 15 minutes programmed anyway. So, but that's good. And a couple points, when you're the canvasser, just work through steps 1 and 2 of the campaign, right? Remember to empathize, be looking for those needs, you practice what you need to practice to get better at eliciting. And then when you're the voter, you know, be medium hard. Olga, what does that mean? Be medium hard. Be medium hard to deal with, or a medium hard sell?
Exactly. Be realistic, you know, don't just immediately share everything about how you feel, even if the person isn't asking you questions, but don't be a complete, you know, Blue Lives Matter person, for example. So somewhere in between, medium hard.
Yeah, we want conversations. So you got 15 minutes. And what do you want you to talk about? That's in the handout, right, Olga?
Yeah, so everyone should see the handout now.
We want you to talk about public safety in Minneapolis. We want you to use the scripts that we're working from. Yep, around the amendment. Isn't that right, Olga?
Yep, that's absolutely right. I want to make sure, do you all have, is the handout working for everybody? Has anyone jumped into the link yet?
No handout.
You should see it. Let me bump it again.
It's in the chat.
I don't.
There we go. Once again, hopefully that time. I do see some people. Okay, there are more people coming into it now. So I think more folks are jumping into it. So go ahead and use this as your guide for the conversation. We're really only, I'll just share my screen actually as I'm looking at this, just to be able to answer any questions. Been quite a bit. So you'll see this is the handout once you jump into the link. Your instructions is to take turns being the deep canvasser and the voter. You're only working through steps 1 and 2 when you're the canvasser. And so we've got a little bit of notes here, what your goal is for step 1, but here's the example, and then overall best practices, and then here's the example. So it's the same content that we were just going through in the PowerPoint slide, only it's in this handout to help you have these conversations. Okay, with that, I think we should be ready to go.
And that stock phrase there, just above all your examples, that stock phrase is like a really good response to somebody who has concerns about the charter amendment, which says, yeah, we know a lot of people have concerns about the charter amendment, or people have thoughts about the charter amendment. And then you say, so why do you feel this way, or why do you feel that way? Yep.
Oh, y'all, thank you, Marnie and Rebecca. You're right. We have 2 questions that are missing from this. For the purposes of right now, because I don't want to lose any time, we apologize. I left out those 2 questions. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. I created this handout, but it's okay. You can transition directly from the first question, have you been following what's been moving in regards to MPD, to, okay, well, I think a lot of folks have some concerns or questions, and then you can jump into those questions there.
Should I be in a chat box? Because I mean in a pair, because I didn't get moved this time.
We will do, yes, let's make sure. So let's give it a try for a second. So let's see who all enters into breakout rooms. Susan, if you have any trouble, or if anyone has any trouble, please come back to the main room. And we are doing our best to use Zoom to maximize learning. So hopefully we won't lose too much time in the
Come here.
And with that, we have everyone coming back. Okay, welcome back, everyone.
Can I just say one thing about what you were saying about a question really, really quick while they're coming back?
Sure.
One thing I learned while I was in real estate about talking to potential clients, the person who asks the questions controls the conversation. Just something to think about.
Definitely. There are a lot of different methodologies and I don't know if practices is quite the right word, but a lot of places that we can learn lessons, you know, nonviolent communications, we're pulling lessons from that kind of communication method to apply into deep canvassing, but it's not exclusive to that. We can definitely draw a lot of lessons across the board. Thanks for sharing that, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everybody who's back, we'd love to know, how did it go? Were you able to empathize while you were asking questions, is one question for all of you. And then 2, when you were the voter, what was something great that your partner did? Feel free to jump into the chat, or if anybody wants to share out loud, please let us know. We have time to at least hear from a couple people. My partner was fabulous. All right, Marnie, woohoo. At being medium hard, oh, I see it. It is very easy to play into that role. My partner Lynn did a great job of focusing on what I felt. Fantastic. I felt my partner was really listening to me from Linda. It was hard to continue the conversation without more information about the amendment. Nancy, that is so true. We are giving you a kind of a first taste here, but it's true that there's a little bit more information that that will make the conversations even stronger. So we'll continue to dig into that. And as we continue using this example, it'll be a little bit easier. From Carissa, it was hard to figure out which questions to ask while also listening. It was extra hard without having as much context on the actual script and issue. Carissa, I kind of want to spend a little bit of time on this because one of the things that we don't want to elicit in the other person is this feeling of like being in a survey. So it's not like once we're on the doors or we're on the phone, we want to tick off question after question after question. What I prefer to do, and this takes a little bit of time, is to really familiarize myself with all of the questions and kind of have them loosely in my mind, and then follow my curiosity as to which one I should actually ask. So then it becomes less about me thinking ahead to my next question and just having them kind of percolate in my mind and letting the pure curiosity kind of lead me there. But it takes experience with the script to get there. Okay, I'll take one more here. Kathy did a great job hanging in there with all of my questions. We were off script, but had a nice conversation. Fantastic. Scott, is there anything that you want to add to this?
I was the voter, and my canvasser heard my story, and she asked me if I felt helpless about the situation that I was describing. And what was really neat was that we were just faking, we were just going through a script. But when she asked me that question, I had like a twinge of kind of vulnerability and connection with her, and that was really revealing. It can even happen in that moment. Yeah.
It can happen all the time. We have all these little opportunities to have vulnerable, real connections with people if we take advantage of them. Okay, it's already 1:15, so I'm going to keep us moving, y'all, because time just flies. So a few things about how to know when to move on is that sometimes we are forced to move from step 2 into step 3. So we're forced to move from empathetic listening into sharing our vision and sharing our story because the voter pivots us in a direction. If that's not what happens, I like to use kind of my senses in order to kind of know when I should move on. So when you feel or sense some kind of change in the conversation, so either the person kind of you feel like you really got at the core of what they were saying, you feel like you've really empathized with them, you've gotten into a different feeling in the conversation, then you know it's kind of time to move into step 3. But the characteristic difference between steps 2 and steps 3 of this conversation is that steps 2 and 1 are all about questions. We're making just enough statements to follow up with another question to get at the heart of who this person is and what their beliefs are. Whereas step 3, where we're sharing our story, we're making a lot more statements. This is kind of that like 30% part where we're speaking a little bit more. Okay, so in order to do that, we're actually going to see a real life example set in California. So I'm going to switch gears really quickly in order to share a new part of my screen. Sorry, y'all. There we go. Goodness. Zoom does get a little finicky sometimes. Okay, so this new example that we're going to be looking at now is set in California. This was during the marriage equality campaign that was going on, Prop 8. And this is a real life conversation happening between a canvasser and a voter. And what I'm gonna ask you all to do is to pay extra attention to when the canvasser takes the conversation from empathetic listening to sharing to the vision, kind of when you feel that shift happen. Okay. And please let me know if you can't hear it.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay.
Prop 8?
Yeah. Do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much. And she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And I believe that stuff, see, I get emotional about this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard.
The video's not showing.
Well, when it comes to health.
Have y'all just been,
We've been watching you, you're cute, but we like the video.
No.
can hear it.
Oh gosh. Okay. My goodness. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna try it again. Please stop me sooner this time if it's the same problem.
Yeah, that looks good.
I can see it.
Okay. Should I begin from the beginning again?
Let's start over. Yeah, it's just been a minute. Yeah.
Perfect.
And
we're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay.
Prop 8?
Yeah. Do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much. And she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And I believe that stuff, see, I get emotional about this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard. A hard decision.
Well, when it comes to health issues and stuff.
What? Just curious. Why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now they can't do things for each other.
Yeah. That's gotta be really hard. And I can see how much you love and care for them. And for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you told me tonight when you were bringing that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins. As much as I love them and stuff, I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now, because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
Sure. We're going to be voting on this again in the future. What do you think would be the right thing to do?
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married.
And why? Why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they love each other, the ones who are couples, and I respect that.
Okay. Okay, that time it really worked, right? Okay, good. My goodness. Okay, well, let's get some ideas. What did you all think of that example? We've got two questions, or a couple questions for you in particular. What were some of the questions that Jackson asked? And did you notice Jackson using other empathetic listening techniques? Go ahead and jump into the chat, y'all. Asked for the cousin's name. Asking the cousin's name seemed to unleash a lot of emotions for the voter, personalizing it for the voter. Stephanie, I think you're absolutely right that not only did we went kind of from this idea of, oh, marriage equality, that's something that I'm not engaging in, that the voter kind of had this idea of like, that's not about me, to something so deeply personal about his family. Naming hard feelings, Jackson tried to find out why he didn't vote. Yeah, you want to do the right thing. Repeated some of what he said. What stands in the way of you voting? Patricia, that's a great one. Yes, canvasser agreed with his views sometimes. Absolutely. Scott, is there anything that you would add here?
Sorry, yeah, I like that Jackson said, yeah, you don't want to mess anything up. And I kind of thought that was sort of identifying a need for sort of order or being pragmatic, or like, like a personal sort of, like a personal need to not get involved in things that you don't know a lot about. So maybe a need for sort of control, more information. Yeah, that's a kind of a tricky one, but I like that. I like that. I feel like I identified like a question about a need there, which really he just reflected back to the voter.
And our big task for you all was to listen for that moment when we went from empathetic listening to the sharing the story and the vision. So did any of you notice, when was that moment when Jackson kind of shifted from one part of the conversation to the other? As he was crying? Good question, Linda. There's one sentence in particular that I'm looking for. We're going to be voting on this again. Yeah, that's a little bit further in the conversation. Barb, you got it. Exactly. It was the moment when Jackson went from, really made the comment about, for some people, it's about the man-woman thing, but for us, it's about protecting one another. And so for the last portion here that I'm actually going to kind of breeze through because we're running out of time, we want to kind of talk about that transition. So in order to go from empathetic listening into sharing your story and your union vision. I come from a union organizing background, so you can see that sneaking in from time to time. Likely you're not having a union vision, but it is a vision nonetheless. You want to start off by sharing what the campaign message is. And oftentimes you'll kind of have a set campaign message that you're centralizing around. And ideally, when you can really level up by connecting it back to their issue. So let's see what this looks like with our Minneapolis example. A standard campaign message there is at the top. What matters to me most with this issue is ensuring a truly safe city for the people I care about and for all of us. Leveling up, what matters to me most with this issue is ensuring a truly safe city for the people I care about. It sounds like having a safe city matters to you too, based on what you said to me about your cousin. Of course, that would mean that the person would have had to have a real conversation with you about that, but that's why we want to draw out, when we're having conversations about policing, for example, draw out stories about safety, because then you can use that connection to move that person. And so here's kind of an example of how you do that with the needs. That's part one of this step. Next, you want to respond with your personal story that relates to the issue or the action at hand. And then you want to end with a question. Here's an example story. I know it looks like a lot on your screen, but Scott, do you want to walk us through it?
Yeah, thanks. this is a story that's related to public safety. And, you know, after you've elicited some of their feelings and thoughts about how they feel about policing and community safety, and maybe even got them to share a story, then you can do as Jackson did, and you can sort of pivot to your own statement. And so this is a long story, but I'll read it out. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So I'm volunteering to transform public safety because 4 years ago, my cousin Henry, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But we'd been, you know, like best buds growing up, you know, climbing trees at our grandparents, vacations on the beach, talking about first dates. And even when I was still in college, you know, we were in touch. But then one night I got a call, you know, from my older cousin, and it just absolutely terrified me. He told me that Henry had experienced an episode. He'd left their home in the suburbs of New York without his phone and without any shoes, and he walked barefoot into the Bronx, right? And so like a painful many hours later, my aunt and uncle got a call then that the police had arrested Henry because a woman in the neighborhood had called the police. She was hoping to get him the help that he needed, right? And what shook me, right, so deeply about learning all this was that the woman, she wanted to get Henry the help he needed, but her only option was calling the police. You know, that wasn't what Henry needed, right? The police, as a result of the arrest, they scared Henry more. They, you know, it's tough on people sometimes, and the psychological damage is quite deep. And I felt, you know, really relieved in that moment that my cousin was white and he'd not been physically hurt by the police. But, you know, at the same time, I felt angry. I felt powerless. There was no mental health counselors or social workers who could have been called in place of the police, right? So that's why I support the Minneapolis Charter Amendment, because I know that, you know, real safety for my family, my loved ones, in that case would have meant a social worker, not a police officer, would have been called to help Henry. And that's what this amendment will exactly allow us to do. So yeah, hearing all that, has that changed anything for you about the Charter Amendment?
What do you notice there? Scott goes, you know, the story really talks about a relevant moment in the canvasser's life to the issue at hand, shows how this very different vision that we can actually take care of each other in community without police, so we can take care of each other with the real help that we need of social workers, shares this vision of what it could look like, and then ends with what? A question. And so because we only have so much time, what we ask for all of you is to really think about your story as the homework between sessions 2 this week and sessions 3 of next week. We're going to pick right up at stories next week, so we're going to keep going with this, but we do have a handout that we can share now in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And this handout comes directly from People's Action. And even if you don't plan on participating in that canvassing campaign, although it's a great opportunity to participate in something that's very important and worthwhile, but even if it's not within your plans, using this handout to understand how to create stories that are relevant to specific issues is really important in kind of the overall process of learning and planning deep canvassing campaigns. So we definitely urge you to spend some time with the handout. And with that, we're kind of at the last. We will have all this information in a follow-up email, just like Scott said. Yeah, all these handouts will go back out to all of you, either within the next 24 to 48 hours, but by 48 hours, we'll have an email sent to everyone. And with that, you know, we only have a few minutes, but we'd really like to hear, are there any questions, any pushback? I can't speak for all of my colleagues here, but I know that I can at least stay a little bit late to ask any questions. And in the meantime, what I'll do is just go ahead and rerun our poll. So we just have the same questions that we asked at the beginning of the session for you all again. So if you don't mind answering those. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump into some questions. Neil, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Okay, my question, let me just say this. I live in New Jersey. I've been campaigning since, I don't know, about the year 2000. Recently, the last 3 or 4 elections, it's mostly been in eastern Pennsylvania, because New Jersey is a blue state. I mean, there's no point in campaigning in New Jersey. Now, so a lot of the campaigning that I do is done by telephone.
Yep.
So, although I understand in principle how this deep canvassing might apply to telephone canvassing, I think it's really got to be somewhat different. It's got to be somehow modified, because you're not face to face. It's different. I mean, there's no body language. There's no intonation. You know, you're lucky if the people, half the time people just hang up on you. So you're lucky if you get a conversation going at all. So I think what I'm asking is, when you think about these techniques, could you please think about how they can be applied in the kind of situation that I have?
That's a beautiful question, Neil. You know, just like the word union snuck out of my mouth earlier, the word doors, I heard it sneaking out of my mouth the whole session. And it's because most of my experience in deep canvassing is spending more time on doors than phones. But the script that we pulled today from Minneapolis, that's a phone script. All of those conversations are happening by phone. And so I would argue that the exact same skills that we're using on the doors can be absolutely used on the phone. But I agree that there's a higher level of challenge. I do think it's much more difficult without eye contact to really connect with the person, but I don't think it's impossible. It's about paying attention to the intonation of their voice. It's about paying attention to the direction the conversation is going and really keeping it going. But I would definitely say that this is very applicable to phone, because the script that we're using today is absolutely a phone script. Scott, is there anything you would add to that?
No, it is a good question, and I don't have anything to answer. I was also paying more attention to the chat, trying to answer a few questions in there. So sorry, Neil. There was one thing I would love to add, though, about Jackson and some of the questions that are in the chat. And what I really want to highlight is something I don't think was said in the chat, was that after the voter said, "I'm going to vote, the right way this time," Jackson didn't just be like, "Okay, great, I'm out." They said, "Well, why is that this time? What's changed your mind?" Jackson asked that voter to go even deeper in that moment into why they'd made that decision. And that's a really smart move and a real pro tip, because even when you get somebody who's a 10 out of 10, or somebody who's like, "Okay, I'm with you," you don't then not do your story. You don't then not dig in on the emotional side of it. You do exactly that anyway. And it's super rewarding, because the tension's totally out of the conversation. But the reason you do it is so that you can sort of shield them and give them resilience, because when you leave the door or hang up the phone, you can bet that the GOP propaganda and the political ads are going to start coming in, and that person's going to get exposed to the other side. And so you really want to have anchored them in their story, in that personal relationship that you had, and their belief that now this was the right thing to do because it affects person X or person Y. And that there's a word, it kind of, it builds a resilience against the other side's arguments. And I wanted to just sort of put that in there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And that connects really well with one question that we've gotten in the chat. How much do we need to understand the alternative viewpoint to have these conversations? And I would argue that having these conversations allows us to understand the opposite, quote unquote, opposite viewpoint, because we're able to engage with someone and move them ideally closer to our side. But I don't know that you necessarily need to know everything about the opposite. I think in the process of doing deep canvassing, we're kind of discovering also what are the common beliefs of people who we perceive as being on the opposite side of us. Scott, I don't know if there's anything you'd add to that.
I wasn't quite sure what Amber meant about understanding the opposition. So you took it to mean understand them as a human being.
I took it to mean more like whoever is against the charter amendment in Minneapolis, that they are the opposition. But please, Amber, let us know what you meant by your question.
Yeah, what I meant was really like, you know, how much of an expert do you have to be on a topic, right? Because I could envision saying something like, well, have you heard about the charter? And they're like, yeah, and I don't like this and this and this and this and this. And, you know, I could see how they might have arguments that I wouldn't be prepared for. I mean, sort of like the other participant who was saying she hadn't anticipated the like vaccine will turn you into a zombie thing. How much do we need to understand so we can anticipate the kinds of things they might say?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to naturally happen as you're practicing it more. So the first conversation will always be a little bit harder than like the 10th conversation in, because after a while, what I have found is it's the same responses that you not the same, every individual is different, but there are categories of responses that you get from folks. And it's not that difficult to familiarize yourself with it, but it does take a little bit of time. I will say that it isn't an instantaneous process. What I like to rely on is reminding myself that ultimately this isn't about facts, because they can always find a fact to counter our facts. And we know that. And that instead, this is about getting to that emotion and that feeling level. So anytime I feel overwhelmed where I'm like, okay, this person really cares about XXXX thing, they've thrown all these facts at me, I would say something like, wow, it sounds like you already know a lot about this and you're really passionate about this. What would it take for you to support the charter amendment? And then all of a sudden we're talking about like an aspirational moving towards the charter amendment. So there are a couple key questions that I think can help us move through those moments in conversation.
Thanks.
Yeah. Scott, anything you'd add to that? Or I also saw Jyoti's hand up.
I do have a question. In the example where somebody had changed their mind and we're going to vote the right way, we are encouraged to ask them why, so that they dig into why now they're voting this different way. In that digging into and reiterating what now they believe, and their reasons for why they're voting differently now, is it at all appropriate or helpful to also have them reflect on what they're rejecting, what they used to believe, and that they are now rejecting, and is that at all helpful?
Can you give me an example of what that would look like?
Well, for example, let's say about charter schools. Somebody used to believe that, oh, this is a great thing for minority communities. And after this conversation, they're like, oh, you're right. It really is going to hurt the public school. And, you know, so I'm going to vote a different way than I believed before. Is it when they have made that point, we can certainly ask them, like, why are they now making this decision or drawing this conclusion, which is, you know, reinforcing what they have come to, which is what we believe to be the right way. But is it also, is it going to reinforce this position if we also nudge them to consider what it was they did believe before that they are now rejecting?
Yeah. I'd be very curious to hear what Scott or anybody else who has been having this conversation, what your response is to that. I will say that my response is that it depends on how, I would say it would depend on how close I was to this person. If I was in the context of a deep canvassing conversation where I'm speaking to a stranger, I don't know that I would want to, like, I would feel like, oh, we're on a good path. I've gotten you to move. I want to reinforce kind of like a commitment between the two of us that you're going to vote for this charter amendment. But if I was talking to someone like relational organizing in my family who I wanted to move, and I felt like we really had a pivot moment where they were seeing things in a similar way to where I was, I think having that conversation where the person analyzes why they felt differently before could be really, really powerful. But I don't know that I would necessarily do that on the doors, because it might take you in a whole other direction then. And I would be a little nervous about doing it. But Scott, others?
It's a really good question. I think it's kind of next level psychology there, Jyoti, of like my first instinct is to always want to reinforce what is positive and not to go back in but maybe I'm just being kind of cowardly and that there's actually a counterintuitive really good psychological reason to go back in and kind of walk them through that transformation that they've already seemed to have gone through, where they've rejected one sort of vision and moved to another. I would think, when that tends to happen, it's almost like that person offers that anyway. So I'm not sure, Jyoti, if you were saying like they give you a hint and you dig in. When that's happened to me, it's usually been somebody who's like, they want to tell you why they're where they are now. And so there's really often, it hasn't happened a lot, but like in those moments, I'm sort of thinking that's done. Like we're on the same side now. And really it's about anchoring them in their relationship with me and remembering me and or remembering that experience, so that like what I often worry about with people that are like a 10 out of 10 is that if it's raining on that day, I still need them to go vote, rather than, well, you know, it's raining and I already feel strongly about this and I think it's going to win. And no, you know, I want them to be like, I remember that conversation with Scott and I told him I was going to do this and I told him why, and I don't want to let him down because, you know, he was really into, you know, the story and the journey that I took him on and that sort of thing. So those are the things, Jyoti, that come to my mind. I don't know if I'd want to drag that person back through that, but maybe I'm just being cowardly.
I say give it a try, Jyoti, and see what happens and let us know.
That's what I'm thinking. The reason I'm asking is because I know like there have been occasions where somebody I've managed to pivot their position at the door. But as I leave, I'm not sure about really how long lasting that effect is. And, you know, because they are surrounded for the most part by people who have a different opinion. So how quickly are they going to revert back to what they used to believe? And would it at all be helpful to strengthen, you know, that new position by saying, okay, this is why I understand, oh my gosh, I didn't think about this. And if we had felt, you know, because of these reasons, I get this. And so that other thing was actually not that great. That's just my thought, but maybe that would be something we could do if there were going to be follow-up conversations, or as you said, relational, when you are in a different situation than at the door.
Yeah. I mean, this is all an experiment. So we definitely invite all of you to give this a try and kind of see what it is that you discover. We're pretty far along. So I just want to answer one other question that I saw in the chat that I think is really powerful. And I think we should then probably close for the night, but we'll be back at this next week. Valerie, you made a fantastic point here saying that one thing that your partner has experienced, because they've been having these conversations, is there are people who are saying things like, there were fires in my neighborhood, lots of public safety issues over the past several months, and I don't know about taking resources away from the police. What do you do in that kind of situation? So I want to say two things to this. First is that not every conversation that we have is a conversation where we can move people. And sometimes it's really good to know, hey, this is a person who's really absolutely stuck in their ways, very assured of their opinion and not able to move. It's better for us to go ahead and save our resources and save our time than to continue to engage. Having said that though, I do think where I would go with this conversation is to say something along the lines of, can you tell me why you think police are the right services to protect your community and yourself, considering all these challenges? So validate the challenges the person is experiencing, but question whether the system is giving them the thing that they need. Because ideally, what we can say is, yes, there are real public safety issues going on across our country, and the police are part of the problem. They are not the solution. But what I would not suggest is not validate. Like, what's very important is to validate the fact that this person has real concerns and share how our vision meets their concerns in a way that is better than the current system. Scott, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, it's a little niche, but I think there's something useful in it, right? So, Val, when the first thing I'm thinking is definitely to sympathize with that, and this is kind of a special because I was in St. Paul at the same time, and I can say, yeah, that was awful. I hated those sirens. I hated those helicopters. I hated, but then I've got a story where I can say, you know, and the thing that I came away that night was real appreciation for the fact that we'd put together local neighborhood watches, because in fact, the police couldn't cope with the breakdown. And there was no way they were going to be able to. And so in fact, I heard sirens all night long, but what I was really paying attention to was the neighborhood watch and the chat that we'd put together. And it made it really clear to me that there are alternatives to keeping each other safe, because when people got together and said, we're going to keep each other safe, that made a huge difference to me and my sense of security and my sense of safety. And connecting with that neighborhood watch during the day to find out how to reach them at night and all that all made a big difference to me. Okay, pause. So like, not everybody's going to have that story to tell, but I think the lesson is, if you can come up with an alternative vision that doesn't negate or doesn't go into the facts as much as it does sort of illustrate the fact that more police isn't necessarily the only alternative, because we're not getting rid of the police with this charter amendment, for example. We're building alternatives to it. And so my story would be more like, okay, I don't need this person to agree with my more radical views on this, but if they can accept that there's alternatives and that the charter amendment is like a viable alternative scenario or solution, then at least I've nullified them voting against it. So maybe they'll just be like, you know, I don't really care now. I'm not going to vote for it, but I see where they're going with this. And as long as they don't get blah, 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 I'm okay with it. I guess that's where I would cross my fingers and hope would work in that situation. Yeah. Great. So, tough question though, to come up with a story if, yeah, you can't match what they just went through. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, my goodness, we are 21 minutes past our time, and I'm so thankful to every single one of you who stayed on to continue chatting and to continue talking this out. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please join us again next week. If you haven't registered for next week, the registration is in the chat box if you want to share it with others. And in the meantime, we leave you with the handout of developing your story, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.